How you doing? I'm Callan and this is Slapped Ham. From the possibility of a female pope to a paranormal triangle in North America that's rife with disappearances and murder. We count 5 mysterious events no one has the answers to. But before we get into it, remember to hit that subscribe button for more awesome creepy content just like this. On September 20th, 1961, Betty and Barney Hill were returning home to New Hampshire after vacationing at Niagara Falls, when they saw a strange sight in the sky. After pulling over to take a look with their binoculars, the couple got nervous and decided it would be best to be on their way. Both claimed to have heard an unusual beeping, and then to have found that they had travelled an additional 35 miles with no recollection of the trip. It was only later, after the couple had arrived home, that all of the events of that fateful night came to light. After arriving home, Betty and Barney both began having nightmares and experiencing general anxiety. This went on for several years before the Hills decided it was time to get some help and find out exactly what had happened to them during their road trip. In 1964, the Hills visited Dr. Benjamin Simon and began to participate in hypnosis sessions in an attempt to uncover what had happened to them. Both of the Hills recalled a strange craft following them while they were on the road. Eventually, they were taken from their car by apparent alien beings. They were then taken aboard the craft and given medical examinations. According to the Hills, the aliens weren't cruel to them. Instead, they seemed to be quite taken with all the little details involving the Hills, examining their clothing and even Barney's dentures. Mental experiments were also performed and skin, hair and nail samples were taken. During the course of the hypnosis sessions, Betty was even able to produce a star map, stating that the aliens had told her where they had come from. Initially, the map baffled astronomers who didn't recognize the star pattern, but in 1969 the Zeta Reticuli system was discovered, and it was found that Betty's chart matched the Zeta chart exactly. The case of Betty and Barney Hill is considered to be the original abduction case. It's still referred to and studied today. Many of the physical attributes that we associate with aliens, large heads, large eyes, long fingers and grey skin, originate with the descriptions given by the Hills. This case has its fair share of skeptics as well as its firm believers. Some people firmly believe that the Hills were abducted on that long ago night, while others believe that they made up the entire story for their own gain. Still, others think that the Hills were simply mistaken, and that they were confused by random events and created the story of the abduction to explain those random events. How hard would it be to conceal not only your identity but your gender in a situation where you're under constant scrutiny due to the high position that you held? Apparently that's exactly what happened during the 800s AD when a woman ruled as the Pope for approximately 2 years. The first known record of Pope Joan appeared in a 13th century chronicle, the Chronica Universalis Matensis. In the chronicle it notes that there was an unnamed pope who was never officially mentioned in the list of bishops of Rome because the pope was actually a woman who had concealed her identity and gender. It's thought that initially Joan disguised herself as a man so she could safely visit the church in order to visit with a man that she was romantically involved with. During the course of her visits, Joan took a strong interest in religious studies and eventually devoted herself wholly to her education, leading to her being considered a well-educated monk. As she gained more respect with church officials, she found herself rising up in the church ranks and was eventually named Pope John the 20th. It's believed that Joan served the people as Pope from 853 to 855 AD. Her secret was only discovered when she went into labour during a public church procession. It's thought that she died a short time later, either due to complications from her pregnancy and delivery, or from the attacks of an angry mob who were outraged that she posed as such a venerated religious figure. Over the years, there's been a lot of controversy surrounding the reality of Pope Joan. The church has stated the story of the female pope is nothing more than a legend, noting that there was never a Pope John the 20th listed, but those who believe in her existence state that the list of popes were deliberately renumbered in order to exclude Pope Joan from the record and protect the reputation of the church. Supporters of the existence of Pope Joan go on to say that there's subtle hints in architecture and art found in the Vatican City that support her existence. Supporters of the existence of Pope Joan also point out that there would be nothing to gain from the creation of a tale of a female pope, but that the church would have every reason to want to cover up the scandal that would have surrounded her ability to convince church officials that she was a suitable and prominent candidate for papal consideration. The Bermuda Triangle isn't the only triangle that has a reputation for strange disappearances. Located in southwestern Vermont is the Bennington Triangle, a location that's been connected with 5 unusual disappearances from 1945 to 1950. On November 12, 1945, 75-year-old Mitty Rivers was acting as a guide for several hunters in the area. As they were returning from the trip, Rivers was separated from the group. Initially, searchers thought that Rivers, who was a seasoned wilderness expert, would soon resurface on his own, but this wasn't the case. Around 300 volunteers continued to search for 8 days, but Rivers was never found. On December 1st, 1946, 18-year-old Paula Weldon went for a hike along a trail near Glastonbury Mountain. When she didn't attend her classes on the following Monday, a search party of approximately 1,000 people took to the woods, and a $5,000 reward was offered. Airplanes were used in the search, but nothing was ever discovered, and Weldon was never seen again, and her case remains open. The next disappearance takes a stranger turn. On December 1st, 1949, veteran James E. Tedford boarded a bus to head home to the Bennington Soldiers' Home. Tedford was seen on the bus at the stop before Bennington, but when it pulled up to his destination, Tedford was gone. His luggage was found still in his seat. It seemed that he had disappeared while the bus was driving through the Bennington Triangle. In October 1950, 8-year-old Paul Jepson was the next to disappear. He'd been seen playing in his family's truck while his mother attended to some livestock. When she returned to the truck, the youngster was gone. He was never found despite the incorporation of tracking dogs which followed his trail to a crossroads before losing the scent. There's been some speculation that Jepson's parents harmed their child and then fed him to the pigs, but no proof was ever found. The final disappearance occurred 2 weeks later on October 28, 1950. Frida Langer, along with her cousin, had been hiking when Langer fell into a stream. She headed back to change out of her wet clothes, but she never made it to her destination. Of the 5 victims, hers was the only body ever found. It was discovered 6 months later in an area that had been previously searched by volunteers. The coroner was unable to determine a cause of death because there was so much damage to the body. There are several theories about what happened to the 5 individuals who disappeared in the Bennington Triangle. Some people think that a serial killer was responsible, others think that the victims were abducted by aliens or maybe even Bigfoot. Regardless, the Bennington Triangle is yet another location that it might be best to stay away from. On March 10, 1928, Christine Collins allowed her 9-year-old son Walter to go to the local movie theatre. When he didn't return home, Christine reported her son missing to the Los Angeles Police Department. This was the beginning of a 36-year search for her missing son. 5 months later, the police claimed that they had found the missing boy in DeKalb, Illinois. They brought the child home to Christine, but while he resembled her son, Christine immediately had her doubts, especially when the police told her to try the boy out before jumping to any conclusions. Christine did take the child home with her, but she was convinced that it wasn't her son and began harassing the police, accusing them of a cover-up. As a result, Christine was involuntarily committed to a psychiatric hospital and was only released after the boy claiming to be her son admitted his name was Arthur Hutchins and that he had gone through with the charade so that he could make his way to Hollywood to see the movie stars. Walter was never found, but it was thought he had fallen victim to serial child killer Gordon Northcott. Northcott's nephew Sanford stated that he had seen Walter on his uncle's farm, and when police investigated, fragments of bone and scraps of clothing thought to have been Walter's were found. Northcott was eventually convicted of killing 3 boys and sentenced to death, but he never admitted to killing Walter Collins. Christine didn't believe that Northcott killed her son. Her convictions were strengthened when 5 years later a boy claiming to have been kidnapped by Northcott came forward, claiming that he had managed to escape from Northcott's farm. Christine felt that Walter could have also escaped. So what actually happened to Walter? The police seem particularly intent on covering up the boy's disappearance, first with the introduction of the imposter boy and then the apprehension of Northcote. But Christine Collins wasn't put off. She spent the rest of her life attempting to find her son until she finally passed away at the age of 75. Before we get to that number one spot and take a look at one of the most well-documented cases of possession in American history, remember to hit that subscribe button and turn on channel notifications. That way you'll be completely up to date with all our latest creepy content. In the late 1800s, a very strange event unfolded in the little town of Watseka, Illinois. It involved tragedy and sorrow, uncanny psychic abilities, and even spirit possession. In July 1877, 13-year-old Lurency Venom began to experience unusual trances, where she was visited by spirits of the dead as well as angels. When she would fall into these trances, Lurency would often speak in different voices and would describe places, people, and occurrences that she had no knowledge of. These trances happened several times a day and could continue for hours at a time. When she would come around, Lurency would have no recollection of what had taken place. Word of Lurency's strange affliction soon spread, attracting visitors to the family's home. Many people thought that Lurency was exhibiting mediumistic skills, so they flocked to the home hoping to make contact with dead loved ones. Others arrived due to simple curiosity, wanting to see if the Watseka wonder was real. The Venom family had no interest in spiritualism. They simply wanted to find help for their daughter, whose health seemed to be affected by her unusual trances. They visited numerous doctors, but there was never any indication that anything was physically wrong with Lurency. Eventually, the Venoms decided that the best course of action would be to have their daughter committed. While the Venoms were making arrangements for Lurency's commitment, they were approached by Watseka resident Asa Roft. He had a very strange tale to share with the Venoms. His daughter Mary had suffered with symptoms very similar to Lurency. He had eventually sent his daughter to an asylum where she had died during her commitment. Roft didn't want the same thing to happen to Lurency. It soon became apparent that Lurency was actually possessed by Roft's dead daughter Mary. The similarity between the two girls' lives was uncanny. Roft followed Lurency's story very closely and was shocked at how similar Lurency's affliction was to Mary's. When it seemed that the Venoms had exhausted all other possibilities in their search for help for their daughter, Roft decided to make his approach. He couldn't stand the thought of another young girl suffering in an asylum just like his daughter did. Roft convinced the Venoms to allow their daughter to be mesmerized by Dr. E. Winchester Stevens, a prominent spiritualist. Eventually they agreed in the hopes of helping their daughter live a normal life. Within moments of Lurency being put under mesmerism, she began to speak in a variety of different voices, each one claiming to be a different individual who had died. Lurency became increasingly agitated until she finally collapsed. She eventually calmed down and stated that she was in heaven and would allow a gentle spirit to speak. The spirit that came forward claimed to be Mary Roth. Mary proceeded to speak to those in the room with her, stating that she wanted to go home to the Roth residence. Word was sent to Mrs. Roth, who soon arrived with Mary's sister Minerva. As they approached the Venom home, Lurency spotted them from a window and stated, "Here comes Ma and Nervy," before running to embrace the two ladies. Everyone who was present believed that the appearance of Mary was genuine. For several months, Mary lived her life in Lurency's body. Lurency herself was nowhere to be found, but Mary informed her mother that she would only be able to communicate through Lurency until sometime in May. Lurency lived with the Roths, treating the Venoms with polite yet distant courtesy. In May, Lurency, as Mary, became very sad and spent the day saying her goodbyes. For an additional 2 weeks, there seemed to be some sort of struggle within Lurency. She suffered severe bouts of depression and grief as Mary was faced with her imminent departure. By the middle of May, Mary was gone. Lurency returned to her parents on May 21st. She no longer exhibited any of the symptoms that she had been plagued with and seemed completely normal. It appeared as if Mary had cured her. So was Lurency really possessed by Mary Roth? Hundreds of individuals who witnessed the events seemed to think so, making it the first and best documented case of possession in American history. Well, there's another one down. Thank you so much for watching. Now in the comments section below, let us know if any of these stories have plausible explanations. Love to get your opinion on them as always. Slap that upward facing thumb as well, or subscribe if you're new. And that's it for me. I'll see you all next time.